Alright, political compass test. Everybody knows what this is, so I probably don't really have to go into it. So let's just get started on it. Okay, test, page 1 of 6. Just a few propositions to start with concerning no less how you see the country and the world. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interest of transnational corporations. I think this question is flawed from the onset, as I think that serve humanity thing is so vague and overused that it amounts to nothing more than a platitude. So ill-defined that it doesn't mean anything, except what you specifically want it to mean, depending on how retarded you are. I think that serving the individual is what's best for humanity. Serving individuals will by definition serve humanity because that is what humanity is made of. And you can be specific about individual rights, while you can't be specific about vague platitudes. The individual rights thing was pretty cleanly laid out by the Enlightenment philosophers. Individual rights are natural rights, and those recognize that because something is an individual consciousness, it is afforded certain rights granted by its creator, which can be nature instead of some intelligent design assumption. And everything stems from there. I think this question assumes group identity, thus group rights, in order to specifically muddle the question, to give a primer to think in collectivist terms instead of individual terms. That fucking pisses me off, but I have to finish the questionnaire in order to make this worth anything, so I will try to assume humanity means individual rights, in order to do so. That itself is a problem because transnationals are made up of individuals too, and it's strange to assume bad faith on their part as a rule in order to justify this question. I will say agree based on my interpretive assumption, but with the caveat that I think this question is total bullshit. A society which is good for the individual will naturally be good for the corpse, and everyone else. To weigh their interest as a dichotomy is to misunderstand how all of this works, intentionally, in order to think in collectivist terms. We'll put agree. I'd always support my country, whether it's right or wrong. No, of course not. I don't have blind faith in anything. I will support my country when it does the right thing. Because the wrong thing invalidates the social contract by which the country governs its citizens. The only way to hold the government country accountable is to not blindly support them when they fuck up, because otherwise, they won't have any incentive to do the right thing to begin with. When my country is doing the right thing, I will commend them. When they do the wrong thing, I will excoriate them. That doesn't mean that I hate them. I support the grander ideal behind my country, which the founders so eloquently laid out after the revolution. Ideals based on freedom and natural rights that they codified to go deeper than any document. And as proof of this, when they threw out the Articles of Confederation and replaced it with the Constitution, this is a country that comes from a deeper ideal. The US did not cease to be when the Articles were thrown out and replaced. It was just reorganized. The deeper ideal remained the same. It's when our current government gets away from that where I have a problem. But that doesn't mean I don't support my country. It means that I support the ideal behind it more than the thing itself. I support what is right, not something that just happened to be born into. I will strongly agree. Well, disagree. No one chooses his or her country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. I think I answered this in the analysis I gave after the previous question. If you're going to be proud of something, do it because it means something and is doing the right thing, rather than just happening to be the place you were born. Strongly agree. Our race has many superior qualities compared to other races. What does our race mean here? Am I supposed to put myself in the scenario and say my race is or is not better, blah 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 blah? On that point, I'm not of any specific race, as I'm a mutt, at best. So I don't really know how to answer that, but I have to anyway. I acknowledge that some races are better at some tasks than other races, but also say that I don't think that means anything. Individual accomplishment interests me more than vague, generalized categories I am generally ambivalent towards to begin with. I think every individual has some general capabilities, and through some combination of genetic, epigenetic, environmental, and cultural factors, you'll have trends towards certain proclivities and advantages, but none that can't be individually overcome. So I think you easily can answer that question with a yes. I don't know what our race should mean, so I'll simply answer with a lukewarm yes, and move on to the next one. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Of course not. They could be your enemy tomorrow, and your current enemy an ally the day after. I think it's fine to use other countries to advance sovereign national interests, and I think it should be expected everyone will do that anyway. Do not assume that would be to make the same mistake that many fallen and betrayed nations in the past demonstrated was a mistake. So I will strongly disagree with this. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. I don't think international law means a goddamn thing, and I don't think anyone should recognize it. It takes away the entire notion of sovereignty, because if international law applies, some international org thinks its powers supersede actual nations. Each and every country can make its own decisions, and then have to accept the consequences of those actions if other countries get involved. An international law or organization is legitimate from their initial premise, so fuck every single one of them. Countries should work towards their specific interest, and even if it's militarily, it's their goddamn bed to make. No international organization should have the gall or audacity to try to tell them how to lie in it. Strongly agree. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I can't say that worries me at all. I just think it is, due to various kinds of cultural, legal, and financial consumer patterns. I think it's stupid and annoying, but I think companies and individuals should be allowed to fuck up and to be stupid, annoying idiots. So long as people know that it's all a game, a work, that it's all fake news, because no one is objective and everyone has an axe to grind, and we should be very wary of anyone who claims otherwise, that it's all bullshit. But I don't think it's worrying at all, so strongly disagree. People are ultimately divided more by class than nationality. They're obviously divided more by nationality. Class is mobile and not set in stone. Nationality isn't either, but at least you have some clear boundaries to use as descriptive dividers. You don't get that with class. I also hate the class warfare shit from its first principle, so I will strongly disagree. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. I don't think controlling one is more important than controlling the other. I'm not even sure we should try to control either of them, as most of the measures corrupt institutions like the Federal Reserve use to try to control them seem to either stave off a collapse and make it much worse when it happens, make it last longer, or causes way more problems than they could ever prevent. So I'll say no, since I don't think either should take precedence over the other. Strongly disagree. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. Nonsense. Typically all regulations do is either drive companies out of business, which favors certain companies and gives that company a monopoly, or funnel private money into the federal coffers with no actual judicial or fair oversight. Strongly disagree. From each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. Absolutely not. Fuck Marx. Fuck everyone who likes Marx. Fuck all the useful idiots out there unknowingly using Marxist theory to justify their banal, feel-good emotional policy decisions. Fuck all the neo-Marxists and the liberty-hating progressives who think that a simplification of the dialectic materialism justifies centralizing and collectivizing. Progressivism is merely progress on the road to socialism. Marxism is a mind virus, created by an idiot who was the stereotype of the bourgeoisie he purported to deride, financially supported by his factory owner friend Engels until he died, which spread his idiocy to other idiots to the point that we'll probably never ever get rid of it. Fuck everyone who believes anything even similar to this. Strongly disagree. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. Why is that a sad fact? No one is forcing you to drink bottled water. If you don't like bottled water, don't drink it. Drink well water, or stream water, or rainwater instead. What the fuck would anyone care what means of fluid conveyance other people use to drink water? Strongly disagree. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought or sold. Ridiculous. The entire notion of private property and the social contract comes from the ability of a government to protect your claim or their claim to land. Wealth generation, as defined by both Smith and Marx's terms, was land on which people could work to extract resources. Wealth came from the result of that extraction being efficient enough to cause a surplus, which can be traded to others for other things of value. You do not have a free society unless you can be sure you, and not the government, own the land your contracts say you own. It is a fundamental part of how all societies work, and to deny that is to demonstrate one's crippling stupidity. Strongly disagree. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. Who's to say what or what does not contribute to society? I think a lot of people contribute nothing of value to society, but that doesn't mean I get to define them objectively as worthless. I don't think the idea that some overarching consensus can determine what contributes to society, beyond market forces exchanging goods or services and toppling those who can't or don't compete. If people make money doing something not overtly harmful, then they're benefiting someone. If they stop benefiting someone, they'll disappear unless banks, or worse, the government props them up. Strongly disagree. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. Nope. Strongly disagree. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. Nah. That's one of their principal internal responsibilities, but certainly not their only one. You likewise have to please your customers, vendors, suppliers, and the law. Disagree. The rich are too highly taxed. Yes, they are. I think anyone who is taxed is probably too highly taxed, but a 39% rate is a clear example of it. Strongly agree. Those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Of course, you get what you pay for. If you pay nothing, expecting something is an unsustainable and overtly detrimental factor in your care being worth anything in the long term. Strongly agree. Governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. I don't think that's the government's job. I think that's the consumer's job not to fall for businesses' bullshit. If the government gets involved, it should merely be the judiciary in civil court. Strongly disagree. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. No. Free market or restrictions. Pick one. A genuine free market by definition has no restrictions imposed on it by the government. How the fuck can you restrict or regulate a market and still think it's free? Oh yeah, double think. Also, again, natural monopolies are rare. It's typically the government getting involved that allows for monopolies to form in the first place. Retard. I strongly disagree. The freer the market, the freer the people. You're goddamn right. A freer market implying a freer people might even be a tautology. Strongly agree. Next page. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. No, I detest abortion and think the act is intensely fucked up, but I think people should be able to do so if they want to, from a liberty standpoint and also a pragmatic one. If women want to murder their unborn child, fine. Making laws to stop them will only drive them underground, and so the practice will continue anyway. Let people do that sort of thing if they want. Just don't let them get away with using euphemisms to justify it. There should be a social stigma attached to it, and people who do it should have the intellectual honesty to call it for what it is, killing your unborn child. Also, with the way things are going, if a bunch of leftists want to murder their future leftist children, go nuts. You're probably doing us a favor in the long run, and certainly saving a lot of helicopter fuel for future generations. So I will strongly disagree. So all authority should be questioned. Of course, that's the basic tenet of skepticism and reality. Strongly agree. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. As a psychological motivator, reward versus punishment always has some relevance. This notion of equitable injury justifying initial injury lacks nuance. Sometimes I think it's applicable, and sometimes I don't think it's applicable. If someone intentionally kills 5 people on camera or in public so you know they're guilty, then the only suitable punishment is their life and retribution, which, remember, does not mean revenge, for the lives they took. If someone pickpockets your wallet and the police catching the criminal, taking his wallet and giving it to the victim along with the stolen wallet seems unjust. So this question lacks the necessary nuance to discuss things like justice. However, I still have to answer it, and while I don't agree every time, I think that it's applicable sometimes means that I should agree, because the antithesis inherent in the notion, if I disagree, suggests less than equitable punishment is best, which is absurd. I think punishment should be very harsh in order to make them justified retribution and work as a deterrent. So, in an eye for an eye, I will agree. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. Fucking A. Taxpayers shouldn't be propping up any of that nonsense. I don't think taxpayers should be contributing to any entertainment venture. Fund what was enumerated as necessary functions of government in the Constitution, and science in the military, because funding the fuck out of both of those things makes us stronger as a nation and individually, because better tech makes our individual lives easier. Fuck everything else. Strongly agree. School should not make classroom attendance compulsory. Agreed. There are definite benefits to an educated populace, and an educated populace will pay off dividends for future generations. However, what we're doing now should not be classified as education. It's more accurately described as 1 part indoctrination, 2 parts incompetence, and 2 parts corruption. Some people benefit from it, but certainly not enough to make all the money and time spent on it worthwhile, especially since it does not seem to be able to make smarter people, so much as ignorant and obedient people. A certain segment of the populace, the smart people, who in ancient times would be called the priestly class, should absolutely be educated. That segment of the population actually benefits from it, and their success can help benefit everyone else. It's not for everyone, though. Especially since it's not about making well-rounded adults so much as making needy, dependent collectivists. Humans did not evolve to spend their childhood and adolescence in a building all day. I think a large amount of the ADHD diagnoses and other personal and mental issues stems exactly from this. Boys evolved to run around their tribal area, learning spatially and from observation and experience while outside, not being talked at and made to do pointless exercises for years. Our society would be better, in my opinion, if the size of the educational system was drastically reduced, so the smart ones could filter through the system with much higher standards and become useful scholars or whatever we need. The dumber among us should learn the basic life lessons adhering to a well-rounded core, what David Foster Wallace called the ability to think. But if they're not cut out for college or office jobs, they shouldn't fear any social stigma when it comes to becoming craftsmen or small business owners. We need more of those than office workers anyway. Strongly agree. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. I'm mixed about this. All people have their rights is really all that needs to be said. People should be allowed to associate with anyone they want. I only see one substantial advantage to keeping to your own kind, but it has nothing to do with rights. It is a biological concern that if humans become too genetically homogenized, we might lack the very ability to survive a significant extinction event. During prior extinction events, the species that had a lot of individual genetic variation tended to increase the probability they'd survive and easily adapt to new or changing environments. You need a lot of variation in the system to give you the most possible routes organisms could take in a potentially very different environment in the future. If the global temperature rose or dropped by 50 degrees over a 500-year span, you need a lot of different potential gene combinations so that the future offspring can be selected via adaptations to better increase the probability of reproducing in a different environment as things slowly change. A genetically distinct population here or in a subcommunity there would be the key to increasing our chances as a species to evolve into something that could better adapt to future environments. However, this rule need not apply to still allow for selection pressures to vary. Likewise, mixing would in many cases give you the potential to create more variation, so long as the number of organisms being mixed does not overwhelm the genetically disparate ones. You need all of the above, but in moderation. Still, that does not trump the ethical mandate that we honor people's unique individual rights, so I can only disagree with this. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Do they? I'd imagine spanking might work for some parents with some specific kinds of unruly children. I don't think all parents should spank all their kids, though. Especially not when too much physical contact has been correlated to an increase in mental problems for their children and a lower IQ. I think this question is stupid, because only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Now I'm to say yes, because physical and mental abuse of children is exactly the sort of thing we applaud here on the dark side. Do it.
In that case, I will have to agree. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. Indeed, children learning how to think independently requires that they know things their parents don't. It's an undeniable consequence of life anyway, so it's definitely natural, but it's also healthy. Behavioral data apparently suggests that parents who guide their children, but let their children figure out stuff on their own too, tend to produce the most productive and well-rounded adults. Children keeping secrets is a logical consequence of all that. Strongly agree. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. I completely agree. I don't think it was ever in the government's purview to regulate what people put in their bodies for the purposes of recreation. I believe the founders understood why a free people would have the right to make their own mistakes and suffer their own consequences for it, or embrace the benefits of it. It's each individual's personal choice to potentially fuck themselves up, like it is the personal choice to better themselves. People need to be allowed to think for themselves and make their own decisions. The inability to do that literally means you're not free. So of course, people should be allowed to have and use drugs, like pot or alcohol, stimulants, psychedelics, or any of that stuff. Also, since prohibiting drugs has only made a massive black market and illegal cottage industries to feed off that, prohibiting it doesn't seem to have done a fucking thing to control it at all. Arguably, it's made the whole thing worse, because now criminals have a huge incentive to get involved. Prohibition doesn't work, it merely drives it further underground and gives it excess value. So I will strongly agree. The prime function of schooling should be to equip future generations to find jobs. Well, that is literally what it was designed to do, give children the kind of education their teachers thought would be required to get a job when they reached adulthood. Some specialization was granted in secondary education and college to give the liberal and scholarly arts to their priestly class, but they were all still expected to be learning what they were learning in order to become a productive worker. So, yep, agree. People with serious inheritable diseases should not be allowed to reproduce. Nope, you can't tell people not to reproduce. The most you can do is keep people with disabilities that cause them to lack aspects of a mens rea from being in situations where they could reproduce, but you can't write laws which forbid individual adults from reproducing. I don't want people impregnating people who have Down syndromes or any number of other genetic malformities, but how do you write and enforce that law? And what could it be used for except to justify state-ordered abortion? Strongly disagree. The most important thing for children is to learn to accept discipline. I don't know if that's the most important thing, but it's certainly a very important part of what makes a responsible adult. I guess I'll have to say disagree simply because the question lacks nuance. There are no savage or civilized people, there are only different cultures. Of course there are savage people, and of course there are civilized people. Most people seem to be merging in and out of each state, depending on their mood. There are certainly different cultures, but culture alone does not prevent individuals from being pricks, or force everyone to be a good person, and neither in case all the time anyway. It's deeper than culture. Though culture is an important part, it's not the core of the issue. I'll strongly disagree. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. I definitely strongly agree there. If you don't put anything into it, you should not expect anything to come out of it to benefit you. I strongly agree. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. Nonsense. If you have a problem, you have to figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. Pretending it didn't happen and distracting yourself dooms you to the personal weakness that Huxley put on display in Brave New World. The whole damn book was about what happens when you allow distractions to shield you from overcoming problems, which in the end will make you personally stronger. It's best to figure out the problem and try to solve it, rather than wallow in it and eventually be buried underneath it. Strongly disagree. First-generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. Nah, I've seen plenty of first-generation immigrants assimilate just fine. This is a generalization, which is way too broad to apply. Strongly disagree. What's good for the most successful corporations is always, ultimately, good for all of us. I think this question is backwards. It has its premise reversed. I think what is good for the individual is what will be the best for society at large, and the corporate entities that lie nested within it. It starts from the individual, policy-wise, and that personal freedom will extend out to make the general situation a bit better for everyone, provided they participate. So it's not about what's good for corps, but what is good for individuals, which will make it good for corps and society too. I guess this stress is trying to line up another dichotomy, with which it can decide grid placement based on the X or Y result. I'm guessing the intent of this one is to move it on the X-axis, and that agree moves left, while disagree moves right. So in that case, I'll strongly agree. Not because I actually do, but because the dichotomy dictates it. Strongly agree. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Duh. Strongly agree. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Yep. Strongly agree. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. That's fucking ridiculous. Strongly disagree. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. No, I think the US government in particular, but every other government around the world in general, has time and time again demonstrated that they can't be trusted with that kind of surveilling power. They've been caught abusing it so many times, I think the answer here is very clear. Strongly disagree. The death penalty should be an option for most serious crimes. Hell yes it should. I think it should be applied to more crimes, and the appeals process should not be able to delay it indefinitely, or until some bleeding heart leftist filth court decides they want to ban the death penalty again that week. The death penalty is not a deterrent now, but that's because it's hardly ever applied. If there is no doubt that someone is guilty of murder, like that theater shooter or all those church shooters, then you shouldn't even get appeals. They should shoot those cocksuckers behind the courthouse within the hour of sentencing. For the crimes that are more ambiguous as to who the guilty party is, fine, they can appeal it. But when there's no doubt that someone is guilty, fuck them. They should be killed immediately. Likewise, we should apply it and try people for treason at federal level more often again, and we should extend the death penalty to rapists, child molesters, and organized crime leaders. I will strongly agree. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed, and people below to be commanded. Nope. I think people of all kinds of personal quality and strength will worm their way into both power and subservience, but that none of those roles are necessary to a functioning society. There should not be any adult who would admit to obeying anyone or anything, but who is making a personal choice to do something because it's rationally the best idea. Leaders come and go, but it's the social contract which endures. To maintain that, the leaders must be culpable to the people and live within the same law that everyone else does. We will strongly disagree. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. I think it's probably still art, but it's also totally fine to call it dog shit. I will disagree. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. Well, punishment is built right into the ethos of criminal punishment. You are to be served retribution for violating the social contract and violating someone else's rights or property. So punishment is the primary factor and motivator. Punishment, even when applied in nuanced ways, can also still be universally applicable. Rehabilitation can't. It can only apply to those who commit crimes which can be rehabilitated. If you have two guys in prison, one whose hobby it is to cut people's heads off, and another whose hobby it was to commit check fraud, then you're not dealing with the same kind of crime or criminals. The check fraud guy can probably be rehabilitated, while the decapitator cannot. This question lacks nuance too, but at least you can find some substance in the false dichotomy it presents, because punishment can always be applied when due process is followed. Rehab can't. As such, I can only vote strongly agree. It is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. Sometimes, people who score high on the psychopathic index are by definition generally incapable of being rehabilitated. Each individual person has the ability to be a great variety of things, and unfortunately the way that brain seems to work, some portion of them will be complete dog shit forever. People like Ted Bundy, for example, who have a mental disorder which makes them particularly good at being deceptive and tricking people into thinking they have empathy by mimicking a normal person. Like any predator, it's efficient to evolve camouflage in order to get close to your victim. No one would let an obvious and overt monster get close to them, but a monster hiding behind a well-practiced facade easily can. So I will strongly agree. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. I'm mixed about this one too, because who is to say that a writer or artist can't be a businessman? Or that a manufacturer can't learn to play piano or learn sculpting or whatever? I guess this question is creating a dichotomy to test trait conscientiousness juxtaposed to trait agreeableness. Well, you need both to have a successful society, and lacking one or the other will probably cripple it. You need creative, adventurous types to come up with the new ideas, and the industrious people to test them and then make them a reality. On that note, it's probably trying to determine position on the y-axis, and if it comes down to it, I think you need conscientious people just a tiny bit more, because even if they don't have a good idea pool to use to get their new products, they are still the ones growing the food and keeping everyone else alive. So I will agree. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. I agree with this. If you're going to go through the trouble of having children, why wouldn't you devote yourself to turning them into productive and resourceful adults? If you're going to have kids, and especially if you're going to be their mom, if you're going to have kids, and especially if you're their mother, you should put your kids over your career. If you would prefer a career, then perhaps motherhood, or fatherhood for that matter, isn't for you. The ancient civilization in Sparta used to only provide government funerals and memorials if the person who died did so in battle or in childbirth. Mothers who gave their life to have a child and died as a result of that birth were regarded as important to their society as the warriors and kings. Because the Spartans knew how big a sacrifice each underwent, and as a direct contribution to their society and the community at large. I don't like most of what the Spartans did, but I think they got that mother thing spot on. So too with modern day mothers, provided they understand that their children come first. A career is great too, but it should not take precedence over your children. I will strongly agree. Multinational companies are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. If that's the case, then individual countries need to stop it themselves, as is their sovereign right. However, I'm wary of that sort of oppressor and oppressed talk and modeling. As usually, there's a grain of truth there, but you'll also find a mountain of Marxism, so I'm going to strongly disagree. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Ridiculous. I disagree. Astrology accurately explains many things. No, it doesn't explain anything. You cannot be moral without being religious. While being religious generally helps with personal moral efficacy, it's not a requirement. There are plenty of people who have come to their conclusions on morals without it being informed by religion. Plenty of ancient and modern philosophers gave consistent examples of that. Hell, Kant's deontological morality requires no religious input by design, and Epicurus's Artaxias scheme seems to lack any moral framework at all. I'd say that's a nail in that coffin which was hammered fast thousands of years ago. Strongly disagree. Charity is better than social security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Absolutely. When people rely on government subsidies or handouts to reach the bare minimum financially, they tend to stay there. They tend to eventually think that it is an entitlement, and thus demand more of it, which they facilitate by voting for whatever power-mad Marxist is lying to them the hardest about what can be promised and delivered to them. It keeps them weak and dependent. When people get charity, they tend to appreciate it more, and to not think of it as an entitlement. If they know the situation is temporary and based on goodwill, they tend to eventually get themselves out of their financial rut, and attain at least some level of independence. Giving people financial incentives to give up fucks them. Helping them out of genuine charity instead of compulsory government mandate increases the probability that they will figure out how to do it themselves. This is no contest. Strongly agree. Some people are naturally unlucky. Well, those born with development disabilities sure were born unlucky. That doesn't mean, though, that everyone whose life sucks was born unlucky. Some people were born into situations they had no chance to escape, but most people are not. Most people whose life sucks, regardless of whether it was their fault or not, will remain that way unless they take responsibility for it and try to move past it. Obviously, the mentally infirm people can't help it, and I would be fine with subsidizing their life just to make their existence a little bit better for them. Most people don't have that problem, though, and will find out they can only improve their life when they themselves are motivated to work and do so, which I think is what this question is trying to get at, in order to determine a placement along the x-axis. So I will choose to disagree, not because I believe it, because again it's a nuanced thing, but because I think I understand the dichotomy it is trying to get at and place. Strongly disagree. It is important that my child's school instills religious values. Nope, that's not their job. They're already indoctrinating children to be collectivists who only believe in one authority blindly. Our only chance at surviving the results of that is the school system's incompetence in making it stick. Why would you want something so corrupt and incompetent indoctrinating your kids with religion? I oppose it from an ethical and philosophical standpoint, but religious people should oppose it from a religious one. Because why do they think an incompetent and corrupt school would even teach their children their religion the right way? You know they fuck it up. If parents want to inculcate religious values in their children, they should do it themselves. Strongly disagree. Sex outside of marriage is usually immoral. I don't think you should legislate morality because I think morality is your own personal standard, which can't be applied to any other people. If you think sex before marriage is immoral, fine, but you don't get to dictate what anyone else thinks about it. Therefore, I will strongly disagree. A same-sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. Sure, if gays want to adopt kids, go ahead. Not one fuck was given by me that day. Agree. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. Yep. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Yep. No one can feel naturally homosexual. I don't know. I don't buy that gay gene crap, but I do think certain genetic combinations tend to make a brain which has a higher probability of being influenced by something during one's youth and causing that individual to have sexually deviant preferences or tendencies eventually. I think this is a result of evolution, which when certain social or environmental triggers are kicked, those brains with the higher probability towards deviancy will act on it and reduce the strain on the community by having less children. It is a population throttle that we don't really understand yet. Does that mean they naturally feel homosexual? I suppose so. But does that mean that they have some gay gene which will make them gay from birth? No, of course not. That doesn't really answer this question, though. However, since it's another absolute,
I shall disagree, because sexual deviancy is part and parcel of the dark side of the Force. Do it.
And so I disagree. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. I don't think talking about anything really can go too far, because, adults can talk about whatever they want and that should be fine. But there is a good argument to make which says that telling 3-year-olds that they can be trannies is taking dialogue about sex way too far. So, I really agree. See where I stand. Alright, it says political compass, economic left-right 7.13, social libertarian authoritarian -3.38. That puts me about here, which is usually about where it puts me when I take it. I personally think that I'm right here, but you have to follow a specific set of scales that are set on a dichotomy, so it's not going to be the most accurate thing. There are other ways of doing it more accurate, but this is just something to do and something to show you. So those are my results. I am pretty far to the right and rather down a libertarian, but I think I'm actually down here. I guess it's close enough. All right, well, thanks for watching, and goodbye.